One of the great battles eagerly anticipated in George R.R. Martin's The Winds of Winter is the so-called Battle of Ice. It's a clash that promises to pit Stannis Baratheon's forces against the combined armies of House Frey and House Manderly, fighting under the banner of the Boltons. But what if Stannis Baratheon, a man known for his meticulous planning, is about to deliver a stroke of tactical brilliance? Today we delve into the fascinating night lamp theory, a theory that suggests Stannis will use a series of ingenious strategies to turn the tide of battle in his favor. Stannis and his army are currently entrenched in a small, abandoned hamlet known as the Crofters' Village, deep in the Wolfswood of the North. This is where the battle is expected to take place, a snowy, isolated location that seems to trap Stannis and his men in a desperate struggle for survival. This map, created using descriptions from Asha Greyjoy's chapters in the Winds of Winter excerpts, gives us a rough idea of the village layout. While we can't know the exact design, we can infer relationships between key landmarks, the village itself, the frozen lakes, and the watchtower. These details will become crucial to understanding Stannis' strategy. Now, here's where things get interesting. According to the theory, Stannis plans to use this terrain to his advantage in three key ways: luring the Freys into an elaborate trap, executing a devastating surprise attack, and maximizing shock and awe to demoralize his enemies. Stannis' enemies are marching toward him, bolstered by their knowledge of the terrain. After all, Maester Tybalt of Stannis' camp secretly sent a map of the village to Rose Bolton, a betrayal that may seem like a critical blow to Stannis. However, what if Stannis is counting on this? What if the map is part of the trap itself? The terrain around the Crofters' Village is treacherous. The lakes are frozen, and the heavy snow conceals countless hazards. If Stannis understands this terrain better than his enemies, he has all the tools he needs to pull off an ambush for the ages. The theory suggests that Stannis will lure the Frey forces onto the frozen lakes. With their heavy armor and large numbers, the Freys are likely to believe they have the upper hand. But what if Stannis has planned for this exact scenario? What if he's waiting for the perfect moment to shatter the ice beneath them? Using fire or other tools to weaken the ice, Stannis could trigger a catastrophic collapse, sending hundreds of Frey soldiers plunging into the freezing waters below. Not only would this tactic annihilate a significant portion of the enemy forces, but the sheer shock of the event could sow panic and chaos among the survivors. While it's true that Rose Bolton has access to the map of the Crofters' Village, Stannis may be using this to his advantage. By feeding his enemies just enough information to make them overconfident, he could be setting them up for their own downfall. After all, Stannis is not a man who fights recklessly. He fights with precision, calculation, and strategy. Stannis' army is composed of a mix of Southron and Northern warriors, each with unique strengths and weaknesses that play a critical role in the upcoming battle. Stannis left the Wall with about 1,500 men, and since then, 3,500 Northerners have joined his ranks. However, his army is not without challenges. Arnulf Karstark's 450 men are disloyal, and Stannis has only about 64 horses left, down from the 800 he had when leaving Deepwood Motte. Stannis' Southron troops are experienced and resilient. These men, tested in prior battles, are disciplined and cohesive, making them reliable for executing complex battlefield tactics. Though most of the heavy horse has been destroyed, the remaining knights are versatile and capable of fighting on foot. Additionally, the Southrons include educated lieutenants who have been trained in formation-based tactics and siegecraft, giving Stannis a cornerstone for traditional warfare. On the other hand, the northern mountain clans have vastly superior numbers and are much more mobile, thanks to their garrons and their ability to traverse heavy snow. However, their lack of battlefield experience and fractious nature make them an uncertain element in Stannis' plans. While they are united in purpose, seeking vengeance for Ned Stark and the rescue of Arya, their ability to hold under pressure is unproven. Stannis knows their mobility can be an asset for scouting or harrying the enemy, but he cannot depend on them to hold crucial positions or execute disciplined maneuvers. Stannis' army, then, is divided into two distinct components: a slow but reliable core of tested Southrons, and an untested yet mobile horde of northern clansmen. Finding the right way to utilize both groups will be critical to his success. As a commander, Stannis Baratheon's reputation precedes him. He has shown genius in both naval and land combat and is known for his tenacity and dispassionate approach to strategy. His ability to separate personal feelings from tactical decisions allows him to execute plans with precision. Stannis' military acumen will undoubtedly be a deciding factor in the battle to come. In contrast, the Frey and Manderly armies that oppose Stannis are fragmented and plagued by internal issues. These two factions are not working together, but are effectively two separate armies. The Freys number over 1,400 men, while the Manderlys bring only 300 disloyal soldiers to the field. While the Freys and Manderlys share the Southron military structure of knights and chivalry, their forces differ significantly in experience. Stannis' men have been tested in combat, while the Freys and Manderlys are largely unproven. Many Freys avoided heavy fighting during Robb Stark's campaign, thanks to Roose Bolton's careful maneuvering to minimize his allies' casualties. Similarly, Wyman Manderly sent his least trusted knights north, leaving their combat experience unclear. Additionally, the two factions are deeply divided. The Freys and Manderlys are openly hostile toward one another, and their lack of coordination makes it unlikely they will approach Stannis together. When separated, each faction is weaker than Stannis' forces, especially the small Manderly contingent. The commanders of these forces also leave much to be desired. Wyman Manderly, while politically cunning, has no proven battlefield leadership skills and may even delegate command to one of his knights, none of whom have demonstrated any particular ability. Hosteen Frey, on the other hand, is a veteran fighter with significant battlefield experience, but his skill as a leader is questionable. Hosteen's volatility and impulsiveness are well documented. He is prone to reckless decisions, as Stannis himself observes. Stannis broke his neck, I heard, but Ser Hosteen only lost a horse. More's the pity. He will be angry now. Strangely, Stannis smiled. Angry foes do not concern me. Anger makes men stupid, and Hosteen Frey was stupid to begin with, if half of what I've heard of him is true. Let him come. Hosteen's temper and lack of self-control could easily lead to disastrous blunders in the heat of battle. Stannis, fully aware of this weakness, is likely to exploit it to his advantage. The Frey and Manderly armies, then, are plagued by disunity, inexperience, and questionable leadership. Stannis, with his cohesive strategy and superior command, is well positioned to exploit these vulnerabilities. The Bolton loyalists at Winterfell have been led to believe that Stannis is in dire straits. They think he's snowbound, starving, and that his forces have been decimated by the ongoing blizzard. Armed with a map of the terrain at the Crofters' village, and driven by this perception of Stannis' weakness, Hosteen Frey is preparing to lead his forces into battle. Hosteen Frey, hasty and impulsive by nature, is unlikely to approach this battle with careful contemplation. His strategy will likely rely on what he perceives to be Stannis' vulnerabilities. First, the disarray he expects from an army of starving men trapped in heavy snow. And second, Stannis' choice to camp in what appears to be a precarious position, a village situated between two frozen lakes, seemingly vulnerable to a flanking maneuver. With this in mind, Hosteen might consider two potential strategies. The first is a rudimentary flank. Hosteen could form his forces at a distance and split his men to surround the two land entries into the village. This would cut off Stannis' retreat and allow Hosteen to attack from multiple directions. While this would be the smarter, more thoughtful move, it's unclear if Hosteen has the patience or tactical sophistication to execute such a plan. The second option is a crushing wedge. Hosteen might opt for a direct assault, sending all or most of his forces into a concentrated charge on the village. This approach, while simpler, would rely heavily on Hosteen's belief that his superior numbers can overwhelm Stannis' camp. There's even a tactical argument in favor of this. Leaving a retreat open can make an enemy more likely to break. But Hosteen, being Hosteen, would likely choose this approach not out of tactical insight, but because of overconfidence and emotional impulse. Both of these strategies share a critical vulnerability, the narrow land bridge to the village. Whether Hosteen chooses to flank or charge, his forces must funnel through this bottleneck to approach Stannis' position. This limitation is a crucial advantage for Stannis, allowing him to focus his defenses on a predictable and confined point of attack. But even the most carefully crafted plans can be upended by the brutal weather conditions in the north. The blizzard raging at the end of a dance with dragons is an overwhelming force, altering the strategies of all armies involved, Stannis's, the Freys, and the Manderleys. To understand the blizzard's impact, consider Asha Greyjoy's description of the conditions. She was lost before she had gone 10 yards. Asha could see the beacon fire burning atop the watchtower, a faint orange glow floating in the air. Elsewise, the village was gone. She was alone in a white world of snow and silence, plowing through snowdrifts as high as her thighs. The blizzard creates a dramatic reduction in visibility. Landmarks are buried beneath snowdrifts or obscured by the swirling storm. The lakes, forests, and even the village itself vanish in the storm's whiteout conditions. The only distinguishable feature is the beacon fire atop the watchtower, which remains visible from a distance. This lack of visibility is a significant disadvantage for Hosteen. With no clear landmarks to guide him, the beacon fire becomes his sole point of orientation. But this fire is under Stannis' control, meaning Hosteen's forces are essentially navigating based on a signal their enemy controls. The blizzard also complicates any attempt at a flanking maneuver. If Hosteen tries to navigate around the lakes to split Stannis' forces, he risks losing time and cohesion as his men struggle through the snow. The lakes themselves pose a further hazard, as the ice beneath the snow may not support the weight of heavily armored soldiers. Ultimately, the blizzard strips Hosteen of his ability to effectively orient his forces. He is left vulnerable, forced to rely on a beacon that could lead him directly into Stannis' trap. This brings us to the key to Stannis' victory. A clever trick inspired by the pirate kings of the Three Sisters. Early in A Dance with Dragons, Davos recounts the practice of wrecking among the sistermen. He describes how false beacons were used to deliberately lure unsuspecting ships into danger. The beacons that burned along the shores of the Three Sisters were supposed to warn of shoals and reefs and rocks, and led the way to safety. But on stormy nights and foggy ones, some sistermen would use false lights to draw unwary captains to their doom. Stannis himself is well aware of this practice. Godric Burrell, the Lord of Sweet Sister, recalls a time when Stannis, as Master of Ships, personally threatened him over the misuse of the night lamp, one of the sistermen's beacons. He went so far as to threaten to hang me if it should happen that some ship went aground because the night lamp had gone black. These passages might seem like simple world building at first, but they reveal something critical. Stannis understands the principles of false beacons and their devastating potential. He knows how these lights can mislead those who depend on them, especially when visibility is limited. For a false beacon to work, two elements are essential. First, dependency. The target must rely entirely on the beacon for navigation. This is easiest to achieve in conditions where visibility is severely limited, such as the heavy snow and whiteout blizzard currently engulfing the Crofters' village. Second, belief. The target must trust the authenticity of the beacon. This might stem from knowledge of the beacon's usual location or from assumptions about its purpose. For example, a sailor might assume that a beacon always marks a safe harbor, just as Hosteen Frey might assume that a beacon in the snow marks the watchtower described on his map. Stannis, who served as Master of Ships and likely dealt with wrecking on a regular basis, understands these concepts intimately. And in the blizzard at the Crofters' village, he has the perfect opportunity to put this knowledge into action. The heart of Stannis' strategy is simple yet devastating. He will extinguish the watchtower beacon and relocate it to the Weirwood Island in the middle of the frozen lake. This false beacon will mislead Hosteen Frey and his forces, guiding them directly into a trap. From Hosteen's perspective, the beacon will appear to be the watchtower described on the map provided by Bolton's spies. Disoriented by the blizzard and unable to see any other landmarks, Hosteen will lead his forces toward the light, unknowingly crossing the frozen lake to reach it. This trap is made even more effective by the numerous ice holes dug around the Weirwood Island. As one of the northern men observes, "I know them lakes. You've been on them like maggots on a corpse, hundreds of you. Cut so many holes in the ice it's a bloody wonder more haven't fallen through. Out by the island, there's places look like a cheese the rat's been at." These ice holes could easily be part of Stannis' strategy, weakening the ice near the Weirwood Island to ensure that Hosteen's men and their heavy armor plunge into the freezing water. The Freys' susceptibility to traps like this is something that clearly amuses Stannis. When informed that Moore's Crow Foods deadfalls have already claimed the life of Aenys Frey, Stannis smiles. Aenus broke his neck, I heard, but Sir Hosteen only lost a horse. More's the pity. He will be angry now. Strangely, Stannis smiled. Angry foes do not concern me. Anger makes men stupid, and Hosteen Frey was stupid to begin with. If half of what I have heard of him is true, let him come. Stannis' confidence here is striking, especially considering how rarely he smiles in the series. His reply suggests that he has a plan already in place to deal with Hosteen's forces, and that he views Hosteen's impulsive nature as a weakness to exploit. This strategy also aligns with a broader theme in the series: the dangers of over-reliance on maps and assumptions. As Jon Snow once said, the map is not the land. This sentiment could not be more relevant to Stannis' plan. By using Hosteen's reliance on the Bolton-provided map and the corresponding lack of awareness of the true lay of the land, Stannis is able to create a trap that will lead the Freys directly to their doom. The revelation that Stannis plans to misdirect the Freys into a deadly trap of icy deadfalls changes everything. The narrative that Stannis is a desperate, broken man is invalidated. Instead, we see that his reclusive behavior at the Crofters' village has been a cover for meticulous military planning. The false beacon strategy is just one piece of a larger, carefully orchestrated plan. But Stannis still has a problem. What if Hosteen Frey, or any other commander, approaches the battle cautiously? Hosteen's forces could form up before advancing, wait for their baggage train to arrive, or even stop to search for the lakes and attempt to flank Stannis. While Hosteen is impulsive, these are still possibilities Stannis must account for. To ensure the success of his trap, Stannis needs to provoke rash, reckless behavior in the Frey army. He needs to frustrate Hosteen's ability to play a cautious game and compel him to advance hastily towards the false beacon. This is where Stannis' mountain clansmen come into play. These northerners, mounted on snow-hardy garrons, are the perfect tools for harassing the Freys. Stannis can use them to launch light skirmishes, small-scale attacks designed to frustrate and distract the advancing Frey forces. The clansmen would shoot arrows or attack briefly before retreating, staying out of melee range and avoiding direct confrontation. The purpose of these skirmishes isn't to kill or wound, though casualties would be a bonus, but to disrupt Hosteen's plans and provoke his anger. The constant harassment would force Hosteen into a difficult position. If he waits for his forces to fully assemble, his men will suffer continuous guerrilla attacks. If he attacks prematurely, his rearguard and baggage train will be left vulnerable. If he retreats, the mounted clansmen could pursue and harass his forces further. The idea is to create enough frustration to push Hosteen into a rash decision. The clansmen's attacks might also appear weak and ineffective against Hosteen's heavily armored knights, giving him a false sense of security. Historically, heavy cavalry evolved to counter skirmishers, like horse archers, by charging them with lances and engaging in melee combat. The Freys, with their superior horses and heavy armor, are likely to believe this is their best strategy. This belief would further embolden Hosteen to charge recklessly, thinking the skirmishers pose no real threat to his knights. Hosteen's impulsive and emotional nature plays directly into Stannis' hands. He has repeatedly shown himself to be easily provoked and prone to rash decisions, especially when his pride is wounded. The death of his brother, Aenus, at the hands of Stannis' allies has already angered him. Hosteen sees retreat as a sign of weakness and an insult to his brother's memory. From Hosteen's perspective, advancing aggressively must seem like the only viable option. He cannot retreat. Waiting exposes his forces to harassment, and attacking allows him to crush the weaker, lightly armed clansmen. He would believe that Stannis' army is already starved and weakened, positioned between two frozen lakes, and vulnerable to a decisive cavalry charge. But this is exactly what Stannis wants. Every step Hosteen takes toward the false beacon brings him closer to disaster. At this point, we have a clear picture of the assets Stannis has set in place to execute his strategy. The false beacon atop the Weirwood Island. The ice fishing holes dug in great concentration around the lake to weaken the ice. The careful deployment of his forces, ensuring their strengths are maximized while their weaknesses are mitigated. A cadre of high-mobility skirmishers to provoke the Freys into a hasty and ill-considered attack. With these elements in mind, we can now outline how the battle is likely to unfold. The Freys will begin with a charge. As we've discussed, the mountain clansmen will harass the Frey forces, only to retreat as the knights advance. This will give the Freys the impression that they are forcing a rout. Since the mountain clansmen use bear paws to move quickly over snow, they'll easily outpace the Frey knights and guide them toward the Weirwood Island and the false beacon. It's important to understand how the Frey's charge will work. In medieval warfare, knights often broke through enemy lines in a wave, riding through the opposition rather than immediately halting for melee combat. This tactic spreads chaos and disarray, forcing the enemy to either turn their backs on the advancing cavalry or leave themselves vulnerable to a second charge. In this case, the Frey knights, seeking the path of least resistance, are likely to move through the middle of the field, where the mountain clansmen have retreated. This charge will leave the Frey knights between the flanks of Stannis' Southron troops, with their foot soldiers lagging behind due to the harsh conditions. The clansmen, avoiding the ice fishing holes, will leave the Freys a clear path toward the false beacon, drawing them closer to disaster. At this critical moment, Stannis will issue the signal. Coordinating his forces with precision is essential to ensure that the Freys are defeated in a matter of minutes. While Stannis has trumpets, horns, and drums at his disposal, none of these seem fitting for a moment that could define his campaign and inspire his men. Instead, there is a far more dramatic signal that Stannis is likely to use: Lightbringer. When Stannis drew Lightbringer during Mance Rayder's false execution, the sword radiated an intense glow, blinding those present. Jon Snow described it as the sun made steel, casting red, yellow, and orange light so bright that men had to turn away, and even horses reared in fear. Stannis Baratheon drew Lightbringer. The sword glowed red and yellow and orange, alive with light. Jon had seen the show before, but not like this. Never before like this. Lightbringer was the sun-made steel. When Stannis raised the blade above his head, men had to turn their heads or cover their eyes. Horses shied, and one threw his rider. If Stannis can replicate this effect, the consequences for the Freys would be devastating. Charging knights, already disoriented by the blizzard, would be blinded by the sudden brilliance of Lightbringer. Their horses, spooked by the light, could throw their riders or lose control, driving them directly into the weakened ice near the Weirwood Island. Interestingly, Stannis has a history of using light to his advantage in battle. During the Siege of Storm's End, Randyll Tarly remarked on Stannis' careful timing, pointing out that he would have forced his enemies to charge into the rising sun, leaving them half-blind. Chosen by Stannis, Randyll Tarly pointed out. He'd have us charge into the teeth of the rising sun. We'll be half-blind. This tactic of blinding an opponent with light fits perfectly into Stannis' character as a commander. Once the Freys are blinded and disoriented, Stannis will unleash the rest of his plan. His catapults, positioned at the watchtower, will fire stones into the lake, shattering the weakened ice and swallowing the Frey knights in the freezing water. Accuracy won't be necessary. The combined impact of the bombardment and the pre-dug ice holes will be enough to destroy the lake's surface. The blinding light, the collapsing ice, and the confusion caused by the blizzard will devastate the Frey forces. Their unit cohesion will crumble, and chaos will take over. Routed Freys who attempt to escape the lake will be cut down by Stannis' Southron troops waiting at the lake shore, while the freezing wilderness will claim any who manage to flee. Meanwhile, Stannis' forces tasked with securing the baggage train, his so-called bagmen, will block the Freys' retreat and capture the supplies. Stannis understands the vulnerabilities of a baggage train in snowy conditions. After only 3 days of marching, a baggage train can lag far behind the main force, as he observed during his own march from Deepwood Motte. On the third day of snow, the king's host began to come apart. The Northmen on their bear paws soon began to outdistance the rest of the host. They overtook the knights in the main column, then Sir Godry Faring and his vanguard, and meanwhile, the wains and wagons of the baggage train were falling farther and farther behind. Stannis knows how snow slows a baggage train and can use this knowledge to predictably separate it from the main Frey army. Stannis can use this experience to predict how the Frey's baggage train will fall behind after 3 days of marching from Winterfell to the Crofters' village. By targeting the train at its most vulnerable moment, Stannis ensures that his forces can capture it with minimal risk. And so, the night lamp strategy unfolds as planned. The Freys are drawn toward the false beacon and into the weakened ice. The blinding light of Lightbringer disorients the knights and horses. The bombardment of the lake shatters the ice, plunging the Freys into freezing water. Routed survivors are cut down at the lakeshore or left to freeze in the wilderness. Stannis' forces secure the baggage train, ensuring their survival and dealing a decisive blow to the Freys. This is the core of the night lamp theory, a masterstroke of deception, precision, and exploitation of the environment. It's a plan that exemplifies Stannis' strengths as a commander: resourcefulness, meticulous preparation, and a willingness to exploit any advantage, no matter how unconventional. The strategy is brutal, but it's also poetic, a callback to the maritime tricks he once dealt with, now adapted to the frozen battlefields of the North. Through this plan, Stannis doesn't just aim to defeat the Freys, he aims to send a message to his men, to the North, and to his enemies in Winterfell, that he is a king worth following, a man who can overcome impossible odds with sheer will and cold, calculating brilliance. Whether Stannis ultimately succeeds or not, the night lamp theory showcases just how intricate and fascinating his character is, and how much potential lies in this pivotal moment of the Winds of Winter. Thank you for watching, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Stannis will pull off this plan, or is his ambition destined to fail? As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into A Song of Ice and Fire. Until next time, stay warm and beware the false beacon.